So if you've spent any time at all perusing my channel, you've probably seen my video all about the similarities and differences between the highly sensitive person and autism. And in that original video, I conclude that being an HSP and being autistic are the same thing. And I wanted to make this video today because I'm not so sure I was right. Hi, my name is Megan. Welcome to Neurodivergent Magic, the YouTube channel for weekly neurodivergent content. This week, we are going to do a little update on the HSP versus autism debate. If you haven't seen the original video yet, make sure you go check that out and then come back here because we're going to be building off of what I said in that video. Okay, you watched it? Awesome. That means you know that the criteria for autism and the criteria for being a highly sensitive person are incredibly similar, and there is a very high likelihood that most autistic folks are highly sensitive and most highly sensitive folks are autistic. However, I have come to believe that there are outliers, and those outliers matter, and we should talk about them. For instance, did you know that there are lots of autistic folks who are actually hyposensitive, meaning they are less sensitive to sensory inputs than average? And did you know there are highly sensitive people who are highly sensitive to emotions, but not to sensory experiences? Yeah, it turns out I may have jumped the gun a little bit on my conclusion in my last video. So what's brought about this change of heart? A couple of things. First of all, I learned new information, and when you learn new information, you should always reassess what you believe. What is that new information that I learned? I learned that there are hyposensitive autistic folks. I always knew that in the back of my head, but for some reason they didn't count to me, and that's wild. I never want anyone in the neurodivergent community to not count. And so I really had to reevaluate what I was thinking about autism and high sensitivity when I really reckoned with the fact that there are hyposensitive autistics out there, and they matter profoundly. Number two, I also had to reckon with the fact that I am not autistic. If you haven't seen my whole video about that, check it out. Basically, I thought I was autistic, then found out that I wasn't, and that identity crisis led to a lot of rethinking of things for me. I thought that I was autistic largely because I have always identified as a highly sensitive person, and when I saw a lot of autistic creators talking about how the highly sensitive person was the same thing as autism, I jumped on the autism boat. But when I realized I wasn't autistic, I realized I was still incredibly sensitive, and that had to come from somewhere. And there was a chance maybe I was a highly sensitive person and not autistic. And number three, time passed. When time passes, your brain has the space and the capability to process things on a deeper level. And basically, I took all of the information that I had in the last video and I reprocessed it in my brain a couple more times, and I came up with this new conclusion that HSP and autism are incredibly similar and often overlap, but not always. Picture it like this. You have the circle that is autism, and you have the circle that is high sensitivity. They basically overlap, but there are little corners, right? Little edges of people, autistic folks who are hyposensitive, and HSPs who are not autistic. So let's talk about why there's so much confusion around the highly sensitive person and autism. Why is this debate about HSP versus autism even a thing? Well, it really comes down to the marketing around the highly sensitive person and the way that the person who discovered the trait, Dr. Elaine Aron, has really marketed it as a neutral trait, not a disorder, not something to be cured, not something that we need to beat out of children or something like that. Rather, something that should generally be celebrated or at the very least seen as neutral. Now, if you're neurodivergent, you know that we have been pushing for this kind of acceptance for the entire neurodivergent community as much as possible. But when Dr. Elaine Aron discovered the highly sensitive trait and realized it was a form of neurodivergence, she didn't push for that same acceptance for all neurodivergent folks. Instead, she really pinned the highly sensitive person against the rest of the neurodivergent world. She was adamant that the highly sensitive trait was completely different from autism, different from ADHD, different from other forms of neurodivergence because it was not a disorder. And that's a real problem because it makes being highly sensitive this quirky, cute thing versus making autism and ADHD and other forms of neurodivergence this big, bad, scary thing. When in reality, neither one is true. The highly sensitive person, these people, we need accommodations. We need help. It may not be a disorder, but it definitely affects our lives, and we have got to find ways to cope with that. And being neurodivergent in other ways, like dyslexia, dyspraxia, or ADHD, is not some big bad boogie monster that's out to get you. And this is why so many autistic creators are pushing back against the highly sensitive label. Because in many cases, though not all, in many cases, these highly sensitive folks are truly autistic, and they just don't realize it because of the way we have stereotyped autism as being male, as being obsessed with trains, as being hyper mathematical and logical, whereas, that's not the only autistic presentation. There's a very good chance that the highly sensitive person is a particular presentation of autism in most cases. Now, this is not me trying to diagnose every highly sensitive person out there watching this video. If you're highly sensitive, what I encourage you to do is do a little research into autism. Go check out people's lived experience of it and learn more beyond the stereotype that's in your head. And if it applies to you, that's great. You've learned something new. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. I am a highly sensitive person who is not autistic. I am proof that we exist. It's just a rocky road to figure out where you fit. I thought I was a highly sensitive person, then I thought I was autistic, and now I'm a highly sensitive person again. It's confusing, and it's okay if your label switches a couple of times. I hope this video helped you better understand the highly sensitive person and autism, and please feel free to comment or message me if you want to chat about this more. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday.